right. So I have met many of you already before. I'm really glad to see some familiar faces for those of you that have attended uh, PGI NPS info sessions. Really glad that you're all here. I am also really pleased to introduce you to Luke Douglas, who is a BPI alum, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about uh, his time at BPI and probably spending more time talking about what he's doing now. I know for a lot of you that are thinking about your career trajectory, both as you select an internship and think about what comes after that. These are some of the answers that he's going to provide, I think, are some of the things that you've been thinking about. So we're really glad that you've been able to join us. So I will actually, on that note, give Luke the floor and have him tell us a little bit about his current role and kind of we'll focus on that specifically. Tell us kind of what you're doing now, and we'll talk a little bit about later about how you that trajectory and how you landed there. So take it away.
Yeah, sure thing. So hi, everyone. I know you have busy lives and there's a lot of competing options. So we're both honored that you're here with us today. So happy to chat with you all. So my name is Luke Douglas. I am the acting director of the Office of Strategic Information Research and Planning at the Peace Corps. So government job, long job titles. That's probably the first thing to know. So the Peace Corps, for those of you that don't know it, it's an overseas volunteer sending organization. It's part of the federal government, basically part of the broader foreign service, foreign policy, foreign diplomacy wing of the federal government. We send volunteers abroad for generally 2 years to live with host country counterparts all over the world and work on projects and really support development there. So we have 3 goals. One is to provide skills where they're needed. 2 is to share America with the world. And the 3rd goal is to bring the world back home. So those volunteers, when they return back to the United States, to bring something of what they've learned. It's really a diplomacy kind of broader agency. My role in the Office of Strategic Information Research and Planning, or OSIRP, you'll hear the acronym if I let it slip out, that's what I'm talking about, is to head basically all of our strategy. So OSIRP is the strategy office. It's the data analysis, kind of big data office. It's the evaluation office. And for those of you in policy school who are taking your eval classes, that's kind of big E evaluation. And then also we run a couple different surveys, both internally and externally from the agency. So a broad remit of a bunch of different kind of strategic-y, business-y types of functions. And then on top of that, we just do a lot of kind of special projects for the CEO and other key agents of leadership. So that's the function. That's what we're up to. Yeah, clear enough?
Definitely. That's why I didn't introduce you with your title, because it was I figured you would do a much better job of that. And I appreciate the acronym reference. I think if you have come to any of our info sessions, I give that disclaimer up front that there will be multiple acronyms, which I think is probably true of the government sector as well. So it's a great intro to our topic tonight. Luke, I'm curious to know if you sort of had, whether it was while you were in your graduate program or perhaps even earlier, if you sort of had a hope or a goal to pursue a career in the government or in the public sector, or if you didn't have that specific goal, maybe was there a specific shift or event that changed that trajectory for you?
Yes. So let's see. I'll say going into grad school and doing the BPI and that kind of thing, I had an inkling that that's the direction I wanted to go, but I didn't know quite what it was. And so I started out my career after undergrad working in the impact investing industry. So based in Indonesia and in Singapore, sourcing kind of small, we'll say $500K to $5 million deals across the region for a private placement platform based in Singapore. And we were doing really good work and it was really important stuff, but that's small dollars, right? Like if someone gave me $500,000 right now, that would be pretty life-changing for me. I wouldn't mind it, right? Who who wouldn't mind that? But when you're trying to create and affect really massive development change, it's not a lot. And so I was like, okay, who does have money? And it's the governments of the world. And you can basically do all the same stuff. I was looking at, what USAID was doing and all these kinds of other government agencies, what they're doing. They're doing all the same stuff that we were doing, just with like a fat stack of zeros on the end. So your ability to scale your impact is so much higher. And I was like, that's something I definitely want to investigate. So that began the journey and the shift out of that kind of finance function into kind of more government-y type of stuff.
I think that's such a good point of and kind of tying back to our theme of how you craft impact in your career, right? Like there is an assumption with public sector and nonprofit sector as well that impact is sort of just inherent to it, but there are a lot of drivers, and so having significant capital behind those endeavors is really important. So I appreciate you drawing that out. I want to talk a little bit I know there's folks here that have either applied or considering applying for the BPI. We won't talk a ton about it tonight, but I'm sure it did play a role in your trajectory as you moved along. So what did you learn as a BPI that perhaps contributed to your decision to move in the direction of the public sector? Or is there something that you learned in the internship that really continues to add add value to your career now?
Yeah, good question. And I'll give you an answer, and it's probably not the answer that you're expecting. So the big thing that I learned at the BPI was that I really liked the kind of consulting function, which is a weird thing, right? Because you say, oh, BPI, I'm gonna like join the park service and like go be in a park and like do cool stuff. And all of that is true. But I had been working in finance before, and I was thinking, all right, finance is very evaluative, and you get a deal, you look at it, you say, yes, no, good, bad, you're cool, here's some money, you're terrible, we're never gonna give you money. And that was the interaction. But I was like, I had this inkling that there was this thing called consulting. There are people in my B school who were talking about it. The professors were talking about it. I said, okay, let's go try it out. But who's going to take, I was a dual degree. I did I did an MBA and a master's of public administration. And so what consulting firm is going to take a first summer person who can't join full time the next year because they're trying to run their pipeline, et cetera. So I was looking for like people that were a little bit nicer than maybe some of those consulting firms who were open to these unique applicants. And so I was like, this is a perfect place where I can try out the function. And even better, it's aligned with stuff that I care about. Like I've been a guide for a little while in undergrad doing like ice climbing and stuff like that. So like I was like, yeah, this is like my thing. And I get to try the thing that I like. And that was the biggest thing that I took away from my time, was that it's really cool to be in an organization and be able to affect change. Because I later, after BPI, I went and worked for Boston Consulting Group for a bit, and you're outside the organization and you do these consulting gigs and you hand over the deck and it's kind of cool. And you're like, all right, and you work on the next thing, but you don't actually get to affect change the same way you do when you're inside the organization as an internal consultant. Because you're there and you can check up on the things that you've done and 6 months later and say, how's it going? And that kind of thing. So that was the real learning there, more than any kind of industry or government type of thing.
If I can add a follow-up to that, because I didn't ask you at the beginning about what your project was. I know a lot of applicants are really interested in the types of projects that are out there. So giving them a flavor of past projects is often really, I guess, tantalizing of what might be possible in the future. So tell us a little more about your BPI project.
Yeah. So I was at Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore back when it was at Lakeshore and not a park. It's had an upgrade, as some people say, which is not true, because according to legislation, they're all equal. All parks are the same, no matter the size, the budget, or the name. But I was in Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore, and I did a shared services project for a collection of parks in the Midwest region. So that particular part of the United States is interesting because there's a couple big parks and there's a whole smattering of little parks, and they all had their own spun up admin functions and IT functions and things like that. And as you're all immediately thinking, I'm sure, why is a tiny park like staffing an admin function and an IT function and like ops functions and finance, etc., when there's a big park like 50 miles away that could be handling that for them. So we looked at all the different activities in that area that the parks were doing. We did some time studies and kind of workload studies, and built a couple of potential org designs, and then facilitated discussions between the superintendents to figure out, okay, what's the right shared services model for the area, and kind of got the ball rolling there. And so I came back to the BMG, the business management group, later, and I was happy to see that that kind of original construction had continued. And so it was like the prototype shared services model for a lot of the stuff that's happening in the Park Service even now. So like it had legs, which was really awesome.
Yeah, that's something I've definitely shared in some of our info sessions. If you've had a chance to attend any of those, there is a lot of off ramp, I guess, or continuation of the projects that you do, where a lot of traditional consulting internships tend to be you're part of a bigger team, maybe in a more junior capacity, where this you're really in the driver's seat. And because it is so, I guess, competitive for parks to get a BPI, they're really invested in whatever strategy you produce. And so it's likely that it's beyond likely that it gets implemented at your park, but even more likely that it gets carried out throughout the Park Service, which is kind of cool. So thinking beyond the BPI and more into the work that you're doing now in the public sector, but I think because both the realms are in the public sector, I'm curious to learn about some of the challenges that you've faced or that are kind of inherent to your sector, unique to public service, around this idea of achieving impact. So what are the barriers? And I think you probably have a unique perspective on this because you have the MBA background with the public administration, and you see how they can sometimes conflict and work together. What have some of those challenges been that you've maybe seen over, whether that was in your internship experience or today?
Let's see. Yeah, I would say probably there's two areas, which is one around policy and regulation, and I think probably another one around sophistication. And so the policy and regulation side, something unique about government is you can only do stuff that you've been explicitly legislated to be able to do, which is really weird, right? If you're a business and you have an idea and you're like, I'm going to go do this thing, it's okay as long as it's not illegal, as you're not hurting anyone or, breaking any laws or anything like that, you can go do the thing. The government puts shackles on itself and says we're only going to do the things we're legally allowed to do because for those of you who've studied your political theory, government has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force within a geographic area, right? That's Max Weber. So the government could go around just killing people, and that's within its remit, right? That's what the death penalty is. All right. And I'm playing this out into a very extreme to point out that you can only do stuff that the Congress has legislated that you are allowed to do it. So your area of innovation and what you can do is very constrained, which makes it really, really tricky because you have to say, okay, now I have this box and I can do stuff within here. Where can I go and what can I do there? So it makes it hard. But for people that like a challenge, and if you like a puzzle, it kind of adds to it. If you're more of like a blue sky thinker and you want to be able to say, I'm going to go do these crazy things, it can be very frustrating for those types of people. I like the challenge. I like, thinking about non-financial impacts and those kinds of things. So that's a big draw for me, but it is really hard. And there are definitely times when I'm just like beating my head against the wall saying, why can we not do this? Like, please, if we just did this, it would result in A, B, C, and D, and D, which would be so much better. So that's the first one. The second one is sophistication. And it's not that the government is unsophisticated. It's that the government is unsophisticated in the particular vertical and realm of knowledge that people who get MBAs acquire. So there will be times when I'm trying to do something that's like a businessy type of thing. Like I'll be like, oh, let's talk about revenue management and like, pricing and dynamic pricing and stuff like that. And people are like, no, I don't know what those words are. I'm not going to talk with you about that. Right. And we all like learn that in your first year at B school. And you're like, I know what those things, like this is pretty common playbook. Let's get it off the shelf and do it. Because you're talking with people at the Park Service, for instance, who are like the preeminent expert in the world on like a butterfly and like the person who knows more than anything else in the world about a battlefield. Right. And so the level of sophistication that they have in your area of expertise is very low. So you're trying to say like, I need to do these things. It's going to be so much better. And they're like, I don't know what those words are. Like, I don't know numbers. Like I read books. And you're like, okay, well, let's start at the beginning and find some common ground. So I'd say those two are probably the two trickiest things, especially in the Park Service, because there are so many people who have such deep expertise in something that is so different from what we all talk about and do and think about.
Yeah, those are so true. And I think for those of you that are in business school, you can see the value quickly of that the kind of thinking that you are learning right now in public service, and even as you get to meet members of the business management group, who is that internal consulting arm to the National Park Service and essentially the host of the BPI. You can see the value that they have within the public service or within the public sector. And so I think those are both a great point. So on maybe the flip side of that last question, certainly there are things that are frustrating. We all face them in our careers, and some are kind of inherent to the sectors, as you pointed out. But what's the thing that really still excites you about the public sector? I know you spoke about kind of the sheer power that's behind the public sector, especially in terms of funding, but is there something else that you would add to say that what's really valuable about the space that you inhabit?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you'll let me be like a starry-eyed idealist for a second, right, the big numbers is awesome, and especially some of the agencies in the federal government are like insane how much money they have. But I think that one of the things that is particularly cool about the Peace Corps, and I think this, you can find this in the missions of a lot of the different agencies, but like for the Peace Corps, we have this ridiculous idea of like, let's create world peace, and like, let's spend millions of dollars doing that every year. And like here, like, the Congress cuts us a check for like 400 some odd million bucks every year. Like, go figure out how to do world peace. And so if you're ever going to find a way to like inhabit your values and like affect change, like for me, this is the place to do it. Cause like I'm there talking with the CEO about how we're going to like make the world better, which is like so crazy because that doesn't happen in a lot of places. Like, normally it's okay, how are you gonna reduce costs by 3.5% this quarter, right? Like that is like a world that I used to be in, and then I came into this world and I'm like, great, I would love to do that. And then for those of you who are really like deep into development theory and have thought a lot about kind of international development, like Peace Corps is very, very, very radical in that it is this service mentality, and you show up in these areas and you say, well, how can we help? Which is not the case with a lot of big development. So think, even I'll throw some shade on USAID or World Bank or IMF, for a lot of those, was kind of top down. The big shift that they're having right now, and very hot topic, is localization, and how do you move ownership to the beneficiaries. Peace Corps is like, hey, we've been doing that for 60 years. Like, how you doing? So it's a really, really cool spot to be. And I think that holds true in the federal government and in a lot of public sector for all different kinds of things, right? If there's a mission that resonates with you, like Park Service gets $5 billion a year to like preserve beautiful places. You don't have to fundraise, like you don't have to go out and write grants. Like literally you just get cut a fat check to go be like, protect the Grand Canyon. And you're like, yes, I will go protect the Grand Canyon. And it's just such a cool thing to be able to do. So I think that's, Yeah, I mean, I know that's like a kind of wishy-washy way to think about it, but it makes me happy. And like it's very, very kind of almost like a radical position to take, to say, I'm going to go bite off this really ambitious, wild thing of like protecting a beautiful space or like creating world peace and like actually work on it.
I don't think it's wishy-washy at all. I'm
I just don't have any data to back that up, which like hurts me.
I think you could probably find some. Yeah, I mean, I think there is kind of a common perception that over the last couple of decades where the trust in government has certainly diminished. Ideals around like value of government roles has decreased. So it makes me really happy to hear you say that, like, look how great this is, and like a chance to live your ideals, I think is something that we all want in some way, shape, or form. And so I think it's a fantastic answer. So I want to open up some time for questions for those of you that are here and have any questions for Luke. So you can maybe think about those, and we'll open that up in a second. Before we go there, though, I would love to hear, Luke, if you have any advice or insight for folks who are considering public sector work. If you were to maybe it's something we just haven't touched on yet, or if you have really specific advice about kind of entering public service, what might you recommend to them? Oh, I think
There's a lot there. So I think probably I'll give like two tidbits. One, the BPI and successful, if you do a good job in BPI, the equivalent of the job offer is direct hire authority, which is a very jargony term. But basically what that means is if you land a BPI, do a good job, get your offer, which is this direct hire authority, anytime, I believe, for 2 years after you graduate, you are on a preferential list to be able to join the federal government in what's called a career service appointment. A lot of terms, but basically the way to think about that is that's a thing that's almost impossible to do via another venue. Like it's almost impossible to like walk up and be like, hi, I would like to work in the, general service, get a career service appointment for the federal government. They'll be like, no, like, because there's vets and there's all these different kinds of preferences and different hiring pipelines, etc. So the BPI is a tremendous opportunity to like launch into that in a way that doesn't exist for a lot of people. Like, I'm not a vet, I wasn't a Peace Corps volunteer, like I didn't have a way to get into the federal government. This gave me that avenue. And then the other thing that I think is relevant or interesting or whatever is like you're gonna have a lot of different options coming out of grad school for what types of things you can do. And when you're thinking about your compensation, calculate your hourly, not your total take home for the year. And the federal government can compete very favorably versus some other options. So when I was at PCG, I was working 80 hours a week and traveling 50 weeks a year. I moved to the federal government. I was traveling to parks like 1 week a month instead of 4, and my hourly was higher in terms of total work that I did. So just putting that bug in your ear to think about it when you're like down the line going, which direction do I want to go?
that is great advice. I have not heard that before, so love that. All right, so would love to hear any questions that you all have. Feel free to just use the hand raise button, or you can, there's a small enough group, if you just come off of mute, I don't think you're going to talk over anyone. So welcoming any questions that you all might have for Luke.
Sure, I can go. Thanks, Luke. Thanks for attending, and thanks for setting this up. The question was kind of around that last point you made, somebody who has done consulting and saw, kind of a lack of purpose in what I was doing, SAP implementations. How have you balanced that? I know you did, BPI, then to BCG, then to the National Park Service, then Peace Corps. How did you balance like those inflection points and ultimately say like, yes, I will go do this, or I'll stay that extra year at BCG, or I will go to business school. Because I presume not only now, but in the future, those will be decisions we have to make as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The big things that I always look for was like, was I having fun and was I still learning? And I think there was a natural curve for each of those opportunities where I kind of said, okay, it's tailing off. And now I'm at like a point where I could say, okay, do I stay in consulting and move into, running my own projects and then starting to sell projects and et cetera? Is that a direction I want to go? No. Okay. Now what's the next step? So that's like such a hard question, right? That's like, you always want to be able to look forward into the future and say, is this decision I'm making now the correct one? Which is impossible to say. But I was always just looking at like, am I having fun and am I learning? And if I was only getting one of those two, it was really hard for me to stay. I really want to be doing want both of those to be put in place. So yeah.
Have a question in the chat. Isabel asked, what would you recommend to international students who are looking for a summer internship in the government or public agencies? I know that can be a tough one. Even the BPI is limited to folks that are have permanent work authorization. So I don't know an answer to this. Maybe Luke, you do from your vantage point in the Peace Corps.
So summer internship in government for the Peace Corps, and I think for most federal agencies, it's probably going to want American citizenship. That being said, long term, Peace Corps hires a lot of what are called host country nationals in our countries where we work. So actually we have more host country nationals than we do full-time staff because of the way we're structured. So like long term, there's a spot, but like in short term, at least I know Park Service and then also in Peace Corps, it's pretty tricky. I would say public agencies can be defined pretty widely, and especially I'm based in DC. There are a lot of intergovernmental agencies that have all kinds of crazy quotas for citizenship and stuff like that. And they want someone who's from X country, and they're like looking for that person to go work at the World Bank or whatever. So it doesn't necessarily have to just be the federal government, because I know the federal government's pretty clear about wanting American citizens for full-time staff.
That's a great tip. Any other questions?
Sure, I'll go. Hey, Luke, I appreciate you having us and everything. It's really great. With that, in terms of impact for specific projects, is there anything that stuck out to you, particularly like a very fond project that you remember and like the impact that it had that you're excited about and you could share?
Yeah, this is can like cost avoidance, does that count as impact? I don't know. We'll see. I'll tell you the story. So I won't say which park because it's not exactly fair, but there was a park that has basically very complicated infrastructure and needed help with its power generation. And so they had a couple different sites, and the more you think about the Park Service, you realize each of these parks is actually like a little city because it has its own police force and its own infrastructure and wastewater and all that. They're insane. So this particular park came to headquarters and said, hey, we need a little bit of money to pay for this feasibility study because we've got this massive infrastructure contractor who I'm also not going to name, who wants to build a bunch of solar arrays and generators and wiring and all this stuff for us and upgrade us and all of that. And at headquarters, they were like, oh, interesting. Show us the business plan. And they're like, oh, well, we need the power. And so we need some money so that we can, make this purchase and get this $50 million system and all that. And they're like, okay, but great. How are you going to pay for it? And they're like, just give us the money so we can do it. And then, so essentially what I and one other consultant in the BMG did is we went toe to toe with this massive infrastructure organization who was trying to sell and basically take the government for a ride on the $50 million like solar power generation thing. And we're sitting there with our laptops, like making models in Excel going, okay, do those numbers that they're saying make sense? Does this make sense? And like, okay, calculating your depreciation curves and doing all this. It was like this really, really cool corporate finance experiment that we did to like prove that this was a bad deal. Cause like on its head, when we're all talking about it right here, like everyone's like, oh yeah, that sounds like a bad deal. But the way government contracting works and all that kind of stuff, like we needed to like prove that it was actually a bad deal for it not to happen. And so like just being able to do that kind of cost avoidance was awesome, because you're like, wow, now that's 50 million bucks that we can spend on something else, which is like not insignificant money. So that's just a really like, I like that one because it's so neat and compact that like, hey, here's a big thing. Like that's a crazy thing. Don't do it. Okay, we won't do it. Like, and no one else is thinking about that because the superintendent was like a cop basically, and some of the other leadership were scientists, and then so they don't have that background. So of course they're going to get taken for a ride by like a Fortune 100 company that comes in with all of their like high powered finance people and sales people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah.
Oh, that was really cool. Thank you. I appreciate that.
That is a fun one. Other questions? All right. If we have exhausted all of,
Anton, I think I saw you talking, but I can't hear you.
Oh, hi,
Oh.
can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is like an open-ended question, but like when you think about like good days at like BCG versus or private versus public, and stressful days, public versus private, like what are some like differences that might come out about like what stresses you out at a private job versus what stresses you out at a public job?
Stresses me out. I certainly care more about like getting it right for getting it right's sake now, if that makes any sense. I think my motivation in the private sector more was to get it right so that my boss would be happy with me so I could get my bonus at the end of the year. But now I'm much more like, I really want to get this right, because if I get it wrong, it's bad. And like I actually own it more, I think probably causes the stress. But yeah, I mean that's probably the biggest difference. And then like I've definitely not had that many like, actually no, I've never had like a 3 a.m. night or a 4 a.m. night working for the federal government. So that's been a big lifestyle shift. Yeah. Not saying they don't happen, especially for folks that work really closely with like emergency ops and things like that. It gets heavy, but like in the strategy world, like things move a little bit slower. And so it's, I'm thinking long term and big picture. And so I don't have crises the way the emergency search and rescue divers at a park do, right? They're up late, but that's a different job.
Actually, got another one real quick, if you don't mind there, Luke. So I'm gonna ask a question here. Across like some of the like national park and like the Peace Corps and all that, the bureaucratic system there. Do you find one like was a little bit harder to work with than the others? I've worked with quite a few government agencies before, and like sometimes it can be a real nerve wracker. If you could share some thoughts on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, Park Service is worse for sure because it sits inside Interior. So there's the whole overlay. So not only do you have to get it right by folks in the Park Service, but you got to get it right by folks in Department of Interior. Peace Corps is independent, and so we answer directly to the Congress, which means like I spend a lot of time focused on the Hill, like on Congress, in a way that I didn't have to at the Park Service. But in terms of the amount of bureaucracy, it's definitely higher at Park Service because it's inside Interior. Weird kind of quirk about things though, Peace Corps has like the highest level of political appointees per employee of any agency in the federal government. So political employees are the opposite of those people in those career tracks that I was talking about that it's so hard to get into. Political appointees are friends of the president. So the president gets elected and they say, hey, you regional manager for Iowa who, helped me win that area, what job do you want? And they say, I would like to be the gift and grants manager for the Peace Corps. And they say, here you go, here's a job. Peace Corps has the highest number of those types of people. So we deal with a lot more personalities because the political appointees are direct representations of the president, and they are there on behalf of the president and serving the president. And so you can't tell them what to do because they are elected by the American people. So they, American people elect the president. The president says, hey, I can't spend every day thinking about gifts and grants management for the Peace Corps, but I will send my person here to do it. And then they say, well, I think this is the thing. And you go, all right, you think that's the thing? Then that's the thing. We're going to go the way you want it to go. And we'll figure out how to make it work, within your needs and your requirements. So it's, they're totally different beasts for very different reasons.
Awesome. Thanks, Luke.
Yeah.
Well, great. I really appreciate all the questions. I think if I could summarize maybe some of the things that we've talked about, like I think Luke has done a great job of showing us both the value of the public sector, but also it's a little bit quirky. So if you're into quirky, I think this is maybe something that you should consider. And I think there are also so many ways that this internship can move you forward in your career. And so even as Luke pointed out, it wasn't even necessarily, oh, I definitely want to work in the public sector. It's, oh, I really like this actual skill and I can use that skill in a lot of ways. And so I know all of you are in kind of the thick of the internship search right now. So hopefully that's helpful, whether you apply for the BPI or not, that look at the skills that you can gain over the summer that will move you forward. So thank you again to Luke for your time and your thoughtfulness with all of these questions that we lobbed at you over the last 45 minutes. For those of you that haven't had a chance to visit the application page, that QR code on the screen will take you there. There you'll find not just the application form, but there's also recordings to the webinars that we've already had, as well as registration links for the last one coming up, which is demystifying the interview process. So if you're aware, there's a live case interview that is the final round. The webinar will talk about that, as well as the one-way interviews that you complete in the second round. Basically, we want everyone to do really well in this application process. We're not trying to set a right answer and wrong answer and put people in one of those two categories. We really want you all to succeed. And so that's what a little plug for that final webinar and what we'll be discussing then. So thank you again for carving times out of your crazy end of semester schedules. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. We hope you'll consider applying. Take care, everyone.